So welcome to Alice in Dunderland. This is Karin Jervert. Karin is a fine artist, author, and psychiatric survivor. She's currently working on a memoir about her journey into and out of the world of psychiatric labels and trauma. Diagnosed bipolar at 21, Karin has suffered abuse, neglect, and forced treatment under the current psychiatric model of care. Today, she is joined by many others fighting for the human rights of those in mental distress in what has been called the psychiatric survivors movement, which consists of those with lived experience of the mental health industry working to radically reimagine and reform mental health treatment. Karin currently works for Mad in America Foundation as arts editor and social media manager. Her other work, including essays, visual art, and poetry, explores empowerment, empathy, identity, normalization of suffering, and the power of creative expression to transform trauma. Her study and practice of Buddhism and improvisational comedy find their way into her work as well. So, Karin, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
How wonderful. And how truly lovely to have you here, really, because it's that thing of surviving, really, and it's that surviving and living to tell your tale. So, and that's the first requirement, really. And the sad fact is that many people don't.
Yes, very true.
Yeah. And so if you can introduce us to your artworks and how they helped you through your diagnosis and your return into full recovery and back to being who you are.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to tell my story this way, because art making, really has been with me since I was a child. I grew up with a mother who was an artist. My grandmother was an artist. With varying encouragement. Women in my grandmother's era were not quite encouraged to be expressive, and it changed a bit with my mother's generation and with mine. So art making for me, when people ask, what your religion was growing up, for me, it wasn't Christianity or any of the, common stories we get about that. Mine was art.
Wow.
Mine was art making. Yeah. Because my mom, really embedded a feeling of a connection of our souls.
Wow.
And our being to how and what we create, and the self-love that comes from this art making process, that it really does feel almost like a religion to me, in a very non harmful framework. It seems so wonderful and benevolent. So I guess to start with, yes, I was diagnosed bipolar at 21. Although, there have been other diagnoses. I believe my very first one was even schizoaffective, and major depression with psychotic features. I've gotten a lot over the years, but I guess the one that stuck was bipolar, and I can see why.
Can I just ask you, because
Sure.
there's always a trajectory, there's always a lead up to a diagnosis. So so what was happening in your life around that time that resulted in various diagnoses?
Sure. As a young person growing into my teen years and then into college, I had, my family was in a very complicated and very, you could be seen as dysfunctional. And my father was quite stuck in his own emotional, turbulent, kind of the not being able to process a lot of trauma that happened to him that sort of resulted in some emotional and verbal abuse. So I was processing all this all up until college, and the way I had decided was the best way to do it was, marijuana and drinking and acid and, being, a little bit of a troublemaker, right?
But also a
Seeking-
little bit of a natural environment for a teenager, a young person, and what happens when you leave home and go to college or university or whatever. It's not unusual for that.
yeah, it's not uncommon, right? Yeah. And I believe this, feeling, I went to Bard College after doing 2 years as an associate's degree at Brookdale, getting my fine arts degree. And at Bard, I studied political science, but I was super isolated at the time. And I believe the isolation and also some problems with my thyroid. Just I have Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune disease of the thyroid, which can cause a lot of trouble, emotional trouble, and I wasn't treated at the time. So, but anyway, yeah. So I was hearing voices. I secluded in my dorm room quite a lot. I was writing just obsessively. So sort of tumbled into being involuntarily hospitalized after being arrested. I was sort of wandering the streets in my hometown after leaving my college, which for me just feels like a whole bunch of missed opportunities of compassionate intervention that landed me there. There were many ways that people could help me up until that point, but they didn't.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that listening to your story and taking your individual experience and putting it into that universal, what happens to a lot of young people at that point of transition, that rite of passage sort of time, leaving home and going into young adulthood and finding their way in the world. You would know from your work with Mad in America that is a very common story, that it's at that point that so many young people wig out in various ways and quite often connected with recreational drug use and end up in the psychiatric system, via the police or whatever, and a very common path. And it's what happens at that point, who you're put into the presence with, that determines what happens to you thereafter for many, many, many people.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you put that in that framework, in that context, because that is true. And what happened to me was, instead of the understanding, and there was a sort of, which will get me into this piece actually, because this piece for me, it's titled Drug Withdrawal. And this is fast forwarding 20 or 19 years at that point, after this encounter with the psychiatric industry, which put a framework on that very natural, very normal process of a young woman facing the world and having little support, and having only a framework of disease up into around what happened to her. So this piece represents sort of this framework that was starting to lift from me, the framework of disease and disorder and dysfunction around my experiences. I had just started creating, or no, I won't say creating. I just started encountering a world of knowledge in groups like the Icarus Project. When it was the Icarus Project, it's now the Fireweed Collective.
Sorry, can you say that bit again? I didn't hear that. What was the project?
It's called, it was called, at the time I encountered it, it was called the Icarus Project.
Oh, the Icarus Project. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and right now it's the Fireweed Collective.
Right.
So I was really reaching into the world where the knowledge I was starting to receive was destigmatizing, was this compassionate understanding what happens to young people, or what happens during these emotional distress experiences. That there was this door and window open to me where I could see the humanity and the normalcy of what happened to me. And precipitated also by when I came off an antipsychotic, 5 years of suicidality, chronic suicidality, lifted.
Wow.
So that, yeah, this block also represents, that weight lifting from my mind. So, it's just this kind of trying to fit your entire being into this framework of disorder and dysfunction and disease. It becomes so oppressive. It did for me, at least.
And it's that looking at this image, which has such a three-dimensionality to it. And it's that thing of, you use the word framework. And once anyone knows anything about the world of psychiatry and diagnoses and medications, that is such a solid entity. It's like this huge oppressive, weighty thing that even though you're floating in space and look to be detached, that ominous presence of this for many people totally inescapable presence of psychiatry and the medications and you having unlocked from that.
Yeah, and I credit a lot of that to being present with others who had crossed that path, who had found their way to an empowerment that is often just suppressed as a body of knowledge.
Yes.
So it took a lot for me to find that open window.
Wow.
But when I did, this weight started to lift. So.
And it's all of that lovely visual language that you use, of finding the path and finding doors and opening windows, all of very visual language that comes back to, for me anyway, looking at it as an art therapist, but also as an artist, it's that thing of what a simple drawing like this, a simple but very skilled drawing like this, makes clear that it's all of that depth of story that this has as part of it, that links you back to that time and what enabled you to unlock yourself, but also unlock that other body of knowledge that psychiatry just does not offer to you. Really?
Yeah.
No, do they?
And that leads me into the second one I wanted to go on. So this is around the time when the words "You're not crazy, Karin, you're an artist" came into my life.
Beautiful.
And this was by a colleague and a fellow survivor who's just a force in this movement, Will Hall.
Beautiful.
And he said this to me, and it was just like lightning in my life. It was like a moment of enlightenment,
Absolutely.
And it was sort of around the same time that I had started and chosen to withdraw from the other medications after I had realized just how much this one was affecting me in this negative way. And so I started being very mindful of my dreams. Wonderful. My dream life just became so active, but it wasn't just being mindful of it. It was knowing and honoring the validity of it. So I was really giving my dream life a value, and that was such an important process for me. So this phrase came from a dream I had, where a man who I started to consider being a kind of guide in my dream
Wow.
world, said these words to me. And what I really started to see was at the core of who I was. It wasn't it wasn't a belief necessarily. It was a feeling that what I went through and what others go through in these times of crisis and suffering were important and valuable and mattered. And what we needed to do was honor rather than oppress and eradicate. And is it bringing this a little higher into like a cultural change idea is, I wonder, this is a question, is that the fact that we are eradicating all of these transformative experiences inside of people who are in crisis,
yes,
is a way of suppressing the transformation of our culture towards a more positive and humane and beautiful relationship with one another and community. So
absolutely.
yeah, so the dark spirits is and I hope I remember all the flowers right, but it's a cypress, which represents death and renewal, also, and rebirth from death. But it was that these really hard, really painful things, suffering itself, death, grief, all of these things are really the earth that transforms us towards enlightenment, towards compassion, towards love, towards community. And the create is a proetia, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, but it's one of the oldest flowers on the earth that they know of, I guess, which represents transformation and creativity. And then of course the lotus, which is always the beacon of enlightenment and compassion. So this one this piece is very important to me. It was a message I needed, and it really reinforced the knowledge that I was trusting in the previous image of that there's something here that matters, that there's nothing meaningless about what happened to me.
Wow. Wonderful.
So,
and can I just, looking at these images, which have, again, have that beautiful, clean, simple presence to them, they remind me of a series of drawers of those labels. It's like the, what are those drawers in offices called?
Like the library. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And exactly. I used to be a librarian, so that's obviously where that comes from. But it's also, for me, a very, very beautiful graphic, simple, understandable mini version of the hero's journey. It's that thing of, calamity, disaster happening, striking in some way, and then you descend to the depths, and then what happens there determines, how you treat the nadir, what you do in the nadir, determines your transformation, determines, the rest of your journey. So it's that thing of alchemy, what you do with the dark spirits and the dark soil and, all of that dark matter, and how you actually use it in an alchemical way to transform base metals into gold, whatever you choose to view that phrase. But it's also that lovely thing of you created your own compartments for this, because a lot of what happens to us in those states is a total sense of overwhelm and drowning and being, consumed by everything and not able to have those boundaries, not able to have that sense of division in a good way.
Yeah, yeah.
image again, you know, it has all of that substance to it, all of that truth, all of that meaning, all of that, you know, showing you and telling you what's going on for you.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to wait until there was a moment I knew that you could cut if you wanted to. Is that your mic is got a lot of wind or something coming into it? So I just wanted to make sure you knew that. And you can cut this part out later in post production. But
I'm down.
Yeah,
I'm down the beach. That's where I have.
Okay.
That's
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you knew that your sound's not coming through really well. But
yeah, like I'm looking at this as it, you know, it may well be just raw footage for something that can be edited into a doco.
Yep.
But at the moment, you know, the raw footage and the way that it works and the ums and the ahs and that is fine.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was all right.
Thank you.
So and I appreciate everything that you said. That was really beautiful. I do love when someone looks at my work with their heart. And it is such a wonderful, fulfilling feeling when somebody really looks at something and feels the truth of it. So I do appreciate your words there.
I totally appreciate the opportunity. I mean, this is what I loved as an art therapist. I love this. I love the fact that your art, anyone's art, will reveal all of those depths and connections and meaning and understanding. And it's, you know, it's always there in a beautiful, totally individual, your own form. Always.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing thing.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I feel you there. I'm on the same page. And so I guess with this piece, I guess the way to to move towards the next piece for me would be that when my dream life became important to me, you know, I was really able to extend that trust towards the things that were happening in my mind while I coped with withdrawal and this piece. Let me make sure I get to the right. Yep, this piece is called Trauma Body, Safe with Me at Last, and you know, this figure kind of came to me as I was sort of imagining my parts, my younger parts, and having conversations with them in my waking life, or as I was like falling asleep or taking a nap. And you know, he was volatile, he was violent, he was someone that was very unpredictable as a visual in my mind. But because of this deep feeling of knowing that pain and suffering was the core of transformation, I was able to look on him with love, you know, in the face of so much anger and real violence. And, you know, he represents the violation of mind and body that psychiatry felt, you know, as well as the kind of betrayals and violations I had as a kid, being neglected and feeling alone and always feeling like this sort of sense of hurt. So this one was a powerful one for me, is that I was able to love this being inside me, and to see the truth of its potential as a benevolent and loving thing, you know, if given the honor and that it deserved. So.
And it's your use of words which, as well as the imagery, which is so powerful here, because, that sense of violence and violation and betrayal and deep hurt, can only result in those feelings of anger, and the only way that those feelings of deep anger and betrayal and hatred, all of that, natural responses to being treated as not worthy of honor, it can only be transformed by learning to love yourself again when
Yes. Yeah, and that's kind of how I wanted to end with this picture, because it really represents what this process was for me, of letting loose the psychiatric framework of disease and dysfunction and chronicity.
Yeah.
Was that I was learning how to love the parts of myself that were rejected and stigmatized, and that meant every bit. That meant every bit of me, even the violence and the anger,
Yes.
and every bit of Karin. I had to relearn how to love, even while being up against an entire industry of force trying to give me the other message.
Yeah. And I mean, and it is, looking at this image, the first thing that sprang to my mind was, that vision of people in psych wards, who go into that catatonic state, who
Yes.
curl up and are fetal and rock. And, I imagine if the world that we're speaking about, the framework, the viewing of these extreme states, if people working in psych wards, saw that happening, they would recognize that it's not yet another manifestation of disease and being mad or whatever. It's someone who's gone back to that state of working their way through it, and that's it. It's you think about the fetal state, you think about catatonia, especially in light of this beautiful drawing that you have here, and you have a very different view. That's all it is of what anyone will see in front of them, what and how hard it is to get to that state of what you eventually had to work with, and how you worked with yourself when you're faced by a whole culture of seeing the exact opposite, opposite.
That seeing is trying to convince someone in pain that their pain is not only meaningless.
Correct. And
it's not acceptable, it's not admissible, and it doesn't make sense. So when you were talking about the catatonia thing, the paralysis, and I've had catatonia in different episodes, and the catatonia and the paralysis, if one is unable to move inside themselves and put that into the world, and then knowing that what they are is not loved and is rejected, this makes sense. A lot of what I tried to say over and over again is we need to work on what's admissible in suffering. We really do, because a lot of what we see in mental hospitals and in our lives day to day about how people are coping, it makes sense with how the world is right now, and the frameworks that we are trying to fit our beings into. The kind of pain that we see makes sense.
Yes, and it's that lovely realization that yes, this makes sense. It makes sense. It's not something that you've made up in your head. It's certainly not something that you're alone with. This of viewing us as human beings, goes back to the beginning of us being human beings. And the fact that our way of being as human beings has now been changed so radically over the past decades, so that suffering, the what's the word? The antidote, not the antidote. The the solution is to drug it. Really, the solution is,
yeah, I mean, it feels like a force towards eradication, right?
yes, and drug it
yeah.
and suppress it. And, then you have, and this has been your experience, this has been the experience of so many people going through this. How if you choose to see it as an initiation, or, whatever terminology you come to use, that this is a human process. And our culture's response to that is to lock you into a hospital and drug all of this, suppress it. And then when the pain and the horribleness, coupled with the anger against the people who are totally telling you that you're wrong and lying and mad, the next response is to throw in another drug, which does the whole chemical cocktail thing again, and then that doesn't work, and you start to come up from that and get more and blah 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 blah.
Oh yeah, that's my story. Yeah, that's my story. I was on 5 drugs by the time I started to withdraw. Yeah.
Oh, it just blows my mind.
yeah. But listen, I guess the last thing I'll say, it's I want to also honor that when we find ourselves in these states, I don't want anybody to think I am not honoring the terror and the pain of these transformations. And those who do feel that they don't have the support or the knowledge or the whatever it takes. It is not. I don't want to put into the world that that this pain is not
real,
just real and astronomical. And it makes a lot of sense too to say yes, please take this pain away however you can. So it's not just the force of an industry trying to eradicate the pain. It's that we find ourselves in so much pain, and I think often we're just without the support.
Absolutely.
We just don't have it because I don't think we teach each other how to be in community with one another. I just don't think that is an understanding, at least in the U.S. We're these isolated kind of sovereign beings that need to survive on our own and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But we really find ourselves, when we find ourselves in need and in pain, the whole thing is a mess, and no one is making the wrong choice, really. It's just that we are stuck in this cycle, and I think it will take many more survivors and people who help to explain or show or guide others towards making this choice of, yes, this is pain. And you know what? I heard a talk, a Buddhist talk, and one of the things it was, I consent to this pain. I consent to life. I consent to suffering. I consent to exhaustion and whatever else is going on. Like, yes, this is real, and this is okay, and this is human. I consent to this. So I think that's the last thing really I want to say and put out there is
perfect.
This cycle needs to be broken.
Yeah, that's perfect, Karin, not Karen. Sorry, my mistake. And
no worries.
And I don't know. I mean, I hope. I mean, it says that it's still recording. I hope it is.
Yep. And I'll stop the share.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get back.
And thank you. And I'm glad that you ended on that note, because I think one of the things that goes really wrong in this thing of psychiatric survivors versus the the mental health system or industry, is that, you know, it ends up as this war of what people believe, you know, very solidly true about this, really. And
yeah, I'm making a very conscientious choice to really find a way through that, because that's so destructive.
yes,
That kind of conflict in our own community. I mean,
yeah,
however you feel or identify or whatever choices you're making, you're still in my community. You know, we're still part of the same
yes,
community of people who have extreme suffering, and you know,
yes,
so we
yes,
need to support each other. And I'm
yeah,
making a very conscientious effort to try and move towards a narrative and a language that includes, you know, everyone. So
yeah. I mean, and I think that's important for, you know, the beginning of our conversation, where you said that you were exhausted, and that, you know, it's what you do now, you know, it's what you do now at wherever you are in the States at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something, you know.
yeah,
You know, it's whether you're going to go and hang out with your cat or your dog or your friends, or watch some movies, or go out and
yes.
what.
Speaking of, my cat is locked in my bedroom, so I better go get her.
Yes, you know, it is that lovely thing of giving yourself you know, the best day that you possibly can in whatever way works for you. Really?
Yep, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. All right.
Right.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this way, and with my artwork and everything. It was really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
likewise. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, have a delightful day.
You too. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.